I'm Brian Phipps. I'm one of the pastors here at Westside. Who wants to join me in thanking our worship team for just continually being creative? Wow, what a great morning. We're wrapping up the series Radical today. It's been a radical series. I've really enjoyed it. Grab your notes out and let's look at the big idea for the last time. Jesus transforms ordinary, broken people. Does anybody qualify for this? Ordinary and broken, he does. He transforms them through a radical 9 resolution that renders them revolutionary. We've been working through Acts chapter 6, then chapter 7, and chapter 8. We're seeing how these ordinary people came alive through the Spirit of Jesus in them, through the Holy Spirit. We're being transformed into radicals. Here's the idea of what's going on. Followers of Jesus are continually choosing whether to be radical or nominal. And in that day and age, it was normal to be radical. Normal to be radical in that day and age. Today, it's become more normal to be nominal. What's the difference between nominal and radical? It's the degree to which you've allowed the Holy Spirit to transform your life to where you were, to where Jesus can take you. Now, I've got a question for all of you. How many of you are really freaking out about my button being messed up right now? Uh-huh. How many of you are willing to tell me about it? Very few, but you told the person right next to you. Did you see that? They don't ever take care of their pastors around here. All right. So here's what I did all week. A couple of times this week, I went around the office just like this, wondering how many people would actually, 1, notice, and then 2, if they notice, actually tell me about it. Statistically, less than 20% told me about it. Very interesting. I would walk through the halls, they'd look down, hey, Brian, how's it going? Like, all of a sudden, we weren't friends anymore because my button is all messed up. It's true. We get into that awkward spot, and we don't know how to negotiate that situation, so we tend to be quiet. Would you write this in the blank? Much of the radical life is left unlived due to our inability to navigate difficult conversations. That's where we're going today. I believe that so much of the potential of Jesus' followers is hamstrung by our inability to navigate the tough situations. For those of you that like things decently and in order, I'm leaving this like this the whole time. I just like to inflict suffering on people. That's just the way it is. But it's going to be a reminder for us because I believe if we actually do grab this idea today and start to leverage it in our lives, it just pulls the roof off of the potential of Christ followers. Because if we can get past conflict, well, we can do anything. We can do anything, and that's what Jesus wants us to be able to do. It's extraordinary. Now, you might think, Brian, the button, that's no big deal. I mean, how many people are lost in this life because your button's messed up? Nobody, but it's a picture of what I'll call a blind spot. You know that part in your car that you can't see behind you? We all have blind spots. One of mine early on was the gift of sarcasm. Like, that's a problem. I didn't know if you'd catch that one right there. Smart bunch. 8:15 was sharper than you guys. Anyway, more sarcasm. I had the problem with sarcasm, growing up, and that was just a way that I showed affection. If I didn't like you, I wouldn't be sarcastic with you. But what I didn't realize is that not everybody responded to my sarcasm with the joy and honor that they should, It was more like it's like a razor blade that would leave little cuts in people. And I couldn't see the bleeding. But fortunately, a friend of mine cared enough about me at some point to say, hey, Phipps, you might not realize this, but when you left that comment, you left her or him in your wake. And it hurt. I could tell. I could see it on their face. You couldn't see it. They didn't want you to see it. The problem is I was blind to that. So who's going to be willing to tell me? You know what I'm saying? But it's not just those kind of things. I mean, we're talking about chemistry breakdowns between people. You've got some folks that are extroverted, they're loud, they're expressive. They start talking to figure out what they think, right? And they're all creative and fun. And then you've got the introverted types who will sit around and wait till they know what they think is right. And then they'll tell you, this is one world, this is another world. Those worlds don't often meet because the chemistry breakdown and the difficulty to lean into those conversations saying, hey, dude, if you could just turn the volume down about 30%. I'd like to hear more about what's in your heart. And if you would ever stop talking, I'd like to share what's in mine. You know what I'm saying? But these chemistry breakdowns keep us from it. Hurt keeps us from having meaningful conversations. If you've hurt me, it's hard for me to go and talk to you about it. I tend to want to default and stay to myself. And then that relationship that once was real good is now distanced. And our ability to be an effective encouragement to one another is now minimized. If I've hurt you and I know about it, I'd rather not face the music and have to go and tell you. You see where this goes, right? It's a big deal. Much of the radical life is left unlived because of our inability to negotiate these difficult conversations. So this is what we need to do. We must be willing to lean into the uncomfortable, would you write that in the blank, to experience the radical, the freedom, the life, the power that comes on the other side of a difficult conversation. Fortunately, one of our guys in the passage is Stephen. He's one of the deacons that was recruited in Acts chapter 6. In chapter 7, this guy is coming alive big time. And he is. He's being transformed by the power of God's gospel. And now he is in a situation where he has to choose whether or not he's going to be nominal or radical. He has to choose whether he's going to go into that difficult conversation well or not. Here's the deal. He's been cornered by a local church there, a local synagogue. And these guys are angry at all the power that's happening in this new church. And so they're out kind of doing the thing they need to do to squelch this young guy, this young buck Stephen. Power, miracles happen around him and stuff. They want to corner him and challenge him to kind of this debate. And they do. And they got schooled by Stephen is what happened. I mean, the guy just has a man of integrity. He's able to answer their questions and basically put them in their spot. Well, that just makes him all the more mad. So they start getting a bunch of people around telling lies in order to get him put on trial, much like Jesus was just months before. So Stephen's on trial for his life, asking the question, am I going to stay nominal or am I going to be radical? Fortunately, God's recorded this conversation for us so that we can see the 3 last resolutions so that we can continue to be radicalized in this way ourselves. Here's how the conversation starts. The high priest asked Stephen, are these accusations true? And this was Stephen's reply. Brothers and fathers, listen to me. Our glorious God appeared to our ancestor Abraham. Now you might be wondering, why did you stop so soon? 2 reasons. One, the resolution has already been found in here. I'll unpack that in just a second. But more than that, he goes on for the next 52 verses. He'd run out of time to finish his entire story. He started with Abraham, goes all the way through the patriarchs, goes to Moses, the tabernacle, the temple, all the way down to the modern times of Jesus before his little sermon, big sermon, is over. So I can't go through the whole thing. But the resolution is this. It's found in the word our. Can you circle that? It's in there twice. Our glorious God appeared to our ancestor Abraham. Here's what we need to check out. Radical resolution number 7. A radical life builds connections deliberately. When you're going to have that hard conversation, when you're having to lean into something, we start by building a connection. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. One of the guys I get to hang around with here a lot at Westside is Brad Mann. He's one of the campus pastors out at the Speedway. I can actually picture him down front with his big old smile and 8.5-foot arms. If you know Brad Mann, he's like 12.5 feet tall. He's huge. Basketball player, good-looking guy, sharp, pastor's pastor. The guy cares for people more than anybody. He is a walking piece of Velcro that people just stick to because of his affection. I, on the other hand, am not very loving at all. You know, I do sort of loving. But when it comes to my role here, I play more of a strategic, big picture guy. Systems. How do we get things to work so that the most people are touched? And Brad and I's worlds are kind of like this. Love the guy, respect the guy. We just think on different platforms. That makes sense? And so I get to be the guy he reports to here at Westside. I get to encourage him, manage him, things like that. So when I want to talk big picture for how to make the most of his Goliath-sized hug at the Speedway, sometimes we're just kind of looking at each other going, it's not connecting. It's lost in translation. And so I think, well, what do I have in common with this guy? Now, Brad played basketball in college. I did not. I rode the pine in my church league basketball team. But, yeah, don't laugh at me, laugh with me, okay? All right? But we did have the game of basketball in common. I know he loves it, and he's got this awesome ministry God's using to really touch people through basketball. So I thought, Brad, let's try this. We've been playing kind of a man-to-man game. Why don't we play more of a zone? Because I knew that much about the game, and I hoped I was right. And it clicked for him. Something clicked. So it's amazing how we can do that. It's not just so that we can build better communication so that things aren't lost in translation. What Brad heard more than anything that morning was that I cared enough to get in his world. You following me? And when you have to have that difficult conversation, you're already going into this thing with your electrodes all charged up, like the fur on the cat is just going, because that's just, it's uncomfortable. I mean, what a way to start the conversation by starting it in their court, so to speak. That's what we need to do. Check out the difference between the nominal person and the radical Christ follower in this situation. The nominal tries to start conversations from my perspective. I want you to hear my point. I want my voice to be heard. I want to leave this thing right. These radical person's very different. They build conversations from shared experiences, like the basketball. How can I walk into their court? How can I demonstrate that we're on the same team here when things get a little more difficult? Now, Stephen had some very difficult news to share with those guys. But he started it with the connection, then he went and told the truth the whole way. Listen to what he says. It's pretty direct. You stubborn people. That's pretty direct. That's tough. Must you forever resist the Holy Spirit? That's what your ancestors did, and so do you. Remember how I said that he had gone through the history of Abraham, the patriarchs, and Moses, and the tabernacle, and all that? He went through, and as he was doing that, he was highlighting all the major points in history where they missed the leading of God's Spirit. Ooh. To have a history and a legacy. That's what he was doing. And then he gets to the very end of the story and it says, they even killed the ones who predicted the coming of the Messiah whom you betrayed and murdered. Built a connection. Yeah, that's our shared history. Yeah, that's our shared legacy. Yeah, I make all kinds of mistakes myself, Stephen must have said. But here's the deal. You have murdered the chosen one of God, and you don't see it, and I'm willing to tell you. Write the next resolution in the blank, if you will. A radical life proclaims the truth boldly. They don't hold a thing back. They make the truth very clear, very plain, just it's impossible to miss, all right? When I was a young pastor, right out of seminary, I went to a church in Central Florida, and it was like the second biggest church in a very small town. So everybody who's somebody goes there or knows the person that goes there. And there was a gal in that town who had the reputation of absolutely slicing people apart verbally when they weren't around. Right? And she was having trouble keeping friends, and her family was falling apart, which you can imagine would happen. So I knew this reputation about her, and then the gal asks me to do some counseling with her at the church. And she says, I'm having difficulty with my friendships. I'm going, well, if your reputation is true, I can understand why. So she comes in, she sits down. She starts with the senior pastor, rips him to shreds. Then she goes to her husband, then her kids. She's going on. And the whole time I'm thinking, yep, reputation's right on. And I'm also thinking of the thing that Jesus said when he said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. This woman's going around causing her own disaster everywhere she goes. She needs to hear the what? She needs to hear the truth boldly. I don't want to do that. Guess who's going to be next if I tell her the truth? Fortunately for God and his kingdom, I was young and dumb and didn't know any better than to do the right thing. And so I just said, you know what? Here's the deal. For the last 30 minutes, and I just told her this straight. For the last 30 minutes, you came in and you started with this and you went and you just sliced all these people down. The problem here is you. I need you to see that. I mean, I don't want to tell you this. And I even told her, I said, I'm afraid of what you'll do to me. But I'm telling her this truth, and I said, the only way you're going to fix this is if you, one, stop doing this. Two, go to everyone you've ever criticized behind their back and admit it and tell them you're sorry. Then 3, go to everyone you've ever said anything to about someone else and apologize for slandering someone in their presence. It's the only way it's going to work. And I'll never forget that twitch in her eyes that started right about that time. And I knew I was in trouble. She picked up her purse like this, went out the door, and slaughtered my new reputation in town. Made it real tough. Small town. I mean, it didn't kill me, but boy, that was really tough. It was really, really painful. Let's compare the nominal to the radical here. The nominal person at this point hedges on sharing the full truth to avoid conflict. Did you write that one in the blank? That's what we tend to do. Boy, believe me, I wish I had Dr. Phil back in that day and age, because I would have loved to have been able to say, how's that working out for you? And just left it at that. You know, hinting around, you might have a problem here. And I hope God gets the rest clear for him. The radical doesn't do that. The radical loves enough to share even the last 10%. The last 10%. What's the last 10%? It's that part you know has to be said, but you're scared to death to say it. Because you don't want to offend, you don't want to hurt. But it needs to be clear. If you do this, boom. It's got to happen. But it's not always easy, and it doesn't always work out the way we want. I love this passage from Tim Keller's book on marriage. Kind of paints the picture of what we need to do here. He says, love without truth is sentimentality. It supports and affirms us, but it keeps us in denial about our flaws. I don't want to be in denial. I mean, if I'm walking around with my button messed up, I don't want you to point it out to somebody else. I want you to do what? Come talk to me about it. But the other part of this quote is so important, because one of the things that I'm afraid of is that you've got a conversation that you need to have. You've been thinking about it pretty much since we started, and now you have the permission to take a hammer and go clobber somebody with it. Please don't ever do that. If you're in a point where you want to go clobber somebody with your words, you need to sit in the chair and let Jesus take the plank out of yours first, before you go grab the speck in someone else's. That's why the second part of this is so big. Truth without love is harshness. It gives us information, but in such a way that we cannot really hear it. And I'll tell you, I did not come up in a way that walked into these conversations helpfully. I avoided them forever. And then I heard you have to tell the truth. And so then I went in, like I did with that lady, probably a little too strong. Not build the connection, just told the truth, wasn't quite as loving, knew at it. But boy, if we could get this, we could get what Paul knew was right. We will speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ. Why do we share the truth in love? So that we can all become more like Jesus. I mean, at the end of the day, this better look like him more and more, less like Brian, more like Jesus. How's that happen? We help each other get there because we care enough for one another to catch the blind spots and move us forward in him. How do I know? How do I know that I'm doing the truth in love? That's what starts to take us to our third resolution. I want to read the third verse here, the last verse, and then point it out. They dragged Stephen out of the city and began to stone him, meaning they took large rocks and just threw them at him until he died. He fell to his knees, shouting, Lord, don't charge them with this sin. And with that, he died. How do you know that you're doing this with the right motive, telling the truth with the right heart? Well, you can see it there. It's not about you. You might be thinking, Phipps, you've told us to tell the truth. One guy died and you got slandered. Is this really what Jesus wants to do? You know it is. You know it is. And I promise you this, you might not die physically, but I bet there's a part of you that will die when you tell the truth, and it's called the flesh. It's the part that wants feedback, positive feedback from everyone. It's the part of you that wants everyone to be happy. It's the part of you that wants your world to be more rosy than this life and nominal in the last. And that part of you will die every time you take the risk to be radical and love enough to tell the truth. I promise you that's what will happen. It's amazing. And I love what Stephen did here. He wasn't just satisfied to tell him the truth. He was so in love with Jesus, and he knew Jesus was alive so powerfully that even when they're throwing rocks at him, the guy is looking up into heaven and saying, Father, please don't hold this sin against him. And you know what those guys had to come to realize when Stephen's doing that? Is that this guy cared for us even though we're killing him. How does he do that? And some of them were probably at the cross when Jesus was dying, and Jesus looks out and says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. This guy elevated Jesus at all costs. Resolution number 9. Jesus is elevated at all costs. It's not about me, it's about him. Here's what the nominal person does in this situation. The nominal strives for an I win and you lose outcome. I'm going to go into this conversation. I know I'm right, and so I'm going to prove it. And so I try to set up the entire argument to be I win and you lose, but not the radical. Here's what the radical does. The radical is prepared to lose for Jesus to be made known. I don't care what it costs me. I just want Jesus to become famous, because at the end of the day, him becoming more famous is the best thing that can happen for me and everyone else in the world around me. The 4-year stay at that area in Central Florida finally came to an end. It's a good stretch. But after 4 years, God said, Phipps, I want you to move up to Charlotte and take a church there and start to lead. And it was an exciting time. We're getting the house all packed. The whole house is on the van, and the van's already headed up towards Charlotte, and kids are in the car, the 2 that we had at the time. Last thing to do was go down to the post office and fill out one of those change of address cards. It's before you could do it on the internet. So I'm down there doing that, and I'm done there, and I'm walking out to my car, and guess who shows up? That lady. Yeah. I was like, Jesus, I thought you loved me. I mean, this is, I can't think of a worse way to end the last 30 minutes of my time here. She comes up to me, and she says, I hear you're moving. I said, yeah, we're moving. Thank goodness. You're probably part of the problem and the reason that we're going. All the things that you don't say, right? She said, I just want to tell you thank you. It took me a while to come around to that. And then she said, no, I want to thank you. You're the only person that cared enough about me to tell me the truth. She says, I want to let you know, about a year ago, I started going to my family and apologizing. And then I started going around to other people that I had slandered people to and apologizing, and I'm just in a different spot. And I hurt you, and I'm sorry. And it was like, whoa. I mean, I came really close to forgiving her right there. It's nice to be able to see the end of the story. Do you remember the conversation that you've been thinking of that you need to have? All right? And you're in that spot where you're trying to choose between nominal and radical. Think about it for a while. Build the connection. Share the last 10%, and make sure that Jesus is famous. Oftentimes, guess what? That means you won't say anything because you saw the log in your own eye before you went over there. Regardless, that's radical. Okay? Now, why go for it? Why go for it? Why leave nominal to go radical and risk these kind of things? I'll tell you why. And it's not just so our communication down here opens up. It's not just so that our lives are more fulfilling. That'll be a piece of it. But the bigger piece is that heaven takes note of this activity. And I want to show you just how significantly heaven takes note when this happens. Stephen, the last thing that he sees is recorded for us here in Acts 7:56. He says, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Now, will you circle the word standing? Every reference to Jesus' posture in heaven after his death and resurrection is what? It's sitting at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, unless one of his kids goes radical and makes sure that he's made famous more than themselves. It's at that point that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords stands up from his seat, takes note of what's going on down there, and not just pays attention, but can't wait to welcome you in with a standing ovation. I want my life to count like that, where Jesus says, yeah, that's my kid. Go ahead, clap for him. You know, that's it. That is it. So many times I've blown these difficult conversations. But I tell you what, if I know Jesus is watching and smiling, I'll do it again. I'll do it right. I'll do it right. Now you might be thinking, I've already messed this thing up way too far. I've dug my hole way too deep. There's no way I can come out. Look at the passage here that's up next. And let's read this out loud together. Romans 8:29. Nice full voice. You ready? God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son. Chose them to do what? Become like his son. What does that mean? Let's look and see. 9 blanks left here before we wrap up. 1, write the name in. Jesus invited others. We're going back through all 9 resolutions here, and we're seeing what the character of Jesus is like. Jesus invited others. One of the things that he said more than anything else was, follow me. Number 2, Jesus invested relationally. Jesus says, I'm with you always, even till the end of the age. 3, Jesus reproduced continually. He started with 3, then he went to 12, then he went to 72, started a multiplying movement that's into the trillions today. Jesus, I've already done that one. I just reproduced that one again. Number 4, Jesus evoked questions with his life. He's teaching, and then someone says, well, who is my neighbor? He's just the kind of guy that evoked questions. 5, Jesus expected interruptions. Jesus is on a parade, and a woman who's bleeding comes up and touches him. He stops to talk to her. The kids want to play with him. He stops to play with them. Next, Jesus explained the story. So many times, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like. And he told parables so that people would understand. He told the story. He built connections. Jesus was talking to a Roman centurion one day, and they were talking about leadership. Just amazing to me that he builds connections in such a powerful way. Jesus proclaimed the truth boldly. When Jesus himself was on trial for blasphemy, he allowed himself to speak the truth boldly, saying, I am the Messiah, even using the sacred name that he knew would get him killed. And then finally, Jesus elevated Jesus at all costs. And he did it in picture form. He allowed himself to be raised up on a wooden cross, crucified for our sins. For the broken conversations that we failed to have, or the kind of conversations we went in with swinging blades and slicing people left and right. He said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. How are you going to change? Jesus is not nominal, therefore I can't remain nominal. Jesus is radical, therefore I must become radical. Here's what I would encourage you to do to start taking more steps toward radical. Look at those 9 resolutions there and circle 3 of them before you leave. Say, these are the 3 that I'm going to work on this year in 2015. And then check the one you're going to start with. Pick the 3 you're going to hit before Christmas services here, all right? And then check the one you're going to start with and just start making that a daily prayer and a daily habit. And then pretty soon when you start to get a little traction with that, lean into the second one. And then by the end of the year, you could come to Christmas Eve services at this spot being 1/3 more radical than you were today. Does that make sense? That's how it works. We got 23 people already signed up to take the radical step toward baptism next week. You don't want to miss that celebration. If you are ready to be baptized, all you need to do is grab one of those Connect cards, put baptism and your name on it, drop it in the box on the way out, and join them in taking that step. Prayer partners will be down front ready to talk to you about the radical lifestyle. God bless you, Westside. See you next weekend.